But today, it's all about what's new. And some of you know me, some of you do not know me, but I am Joe Novino. I'm the Azure specialist. And we host this specifically for you, our customers, to give you additional learning, give you some insights around what's in the market trends, what's new. So it's a really exciting time to sit back, relax, enjoy the cafe. We're going to dish up some really cool, exciting solutions. We'll give you some demos and also some best practices. With me today, we always have a special, what we call guest or guest chef. And Vishwas Lele is the CTO of Applied Information Systems, AIS. And what the difference here is, Vishwas works really close with our Azure product team. He's one of our leaders in the Azure Circle of partners, and he is on the cutting edge. He knows, he presents at Tech Ed, he's around, travels the globe to solve different particular solutions. So he's our expert chef today, and he's going to dish up some really, really exciting things that I get excited about, and I think are going to hit some of your key workloads that you as your organizations are starting to grow and learn more about the services on Azure. So with that, I want to welcome Vishwas. And Vishwas, if you want to flip to the next slide, what I want to do is set the tone. And if you have attended Build, or there's a lot of recordings online, Tech Ed was recently a big event. And as you can see, Azure has significant enhancements. And specifically, I'll call out the areas where I see the market trends. Active Directory Premium, group-based accessing, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. All that is really significant for global authentications for your applications, for your websites, for your mobile devices. Azure networking, ExpressRoute is really hot. ExpressRoute is where you can build a private cloud through your MPLS provider. That's where you don't want to cover over to the public internet, and you just want to build a private experience on Azure and extend your data center. Storage is number one workload for everyone. Store Simple is a big workload where you can take your archive tier 2 and tier 3 data out of Azure, move it through the appliance that we have for you to secure your data and do DR. The other really exciting area is what we call a new feature, Azure Files. And that's where you can basically take an SMB file share and host that in Azure and have document collaboration. That is one of the coolest things I've seen so far, and we'll cover a little bit about that. IaaS, new VM agents, new larger size compute VMs that are available. Websites, the traffic manager, wildcard DNS is another big factor that customers are looking for. Mobile is just, as you know, we're a services and devices company. We acquired Nokia. We're now a company of 125,000 people with the influx of Nokia sellers. So we're going to have a lot of device and services conversations that you're going to look at how you can include a BYOD strategy with high secure management and identity on those devices. And then other services that are available, that remote apps are something that I'm seeing a lot. And then the store. We don't talk a lot about the store, but it's new features in the store. So that's some quick overviews, and we'll cover a few of these features in the cafe session today. Do you want to move ahead to the next slide, Vishwas, please? So those of you that really are not familiar, I'm going to run through just a couple. Why are you considering the cloud? Everyone is. If you don't think they are, they are. There's a lot of them that are moving, and the key workloads here are speed. You can provision dev test environments quickly, spin them up, turn them down, and only pay for what you use. The scale, limitless scale for storage, limitless compute power. You can scale your infrastructure out to meet your global demands. And then at the end of the day, it's economics. And again, keep in mind, Azure, you pay for what you use. If you're smart, you do auto scaling, you can really have a robust extension of your data center at a minimal to low cost, rather than provisioning extra hardware for those peak loads. So they're the key reasons why you're looking at the cloud. Vishwas, you want to move forward? So for those of you that have been working with Azure and those that are new, we started out with regions in North America, Europe, and Asia. You can see how we've grown over the period of the last year. I've been doing this for over 3 years, and we have extensively grown our data centers. Now, these data centers are sizes of 12 football fields. So we're extending, we're in China now, and you see there's always two, so we mirror their data centers for geo-replication and high availability. There's two in Japan, two in Asia, and then we have Australia coming, is already on board. Brazil is coming soon. So we're continually to invest in our global presence. These systems, these data centers, they'll manage Azure, they manage Xbox, the Titanfalls. All of the properties that we have are being managed on Azure data centers. Office 365 have their own data centers. So you see the investments and the worldwide presence that we're going to be continue to grow. And we're growing these data centers every 6 months. They're increasing capacity. So we're making significant investments for you. And think of this as it's your data centers. You extend on your terms. So you want to move forward, Vishwas? Thank you.
Yep.
Now, the size, and just flip this through, there's a couple builds here. The size of the services that we have available to you, this is just one very complicated slide. And one more click there, and we'll talk about the layer of open architecture. We're not just .NET with Java, PHP, Node.js, Python. But each of the layers of those solutions, the top layer is where we see the most impact. Infrastructure as a service, virtual machines, where you can extend your data center. Cloud services, that's really platform as a service, where you bring your app and your data. We manage everything else for you. That's where you're going to extend and get the biggest power and scalability. The websites is where customers are taking their traditional websites and moving them from on-prem to the cloud so that you can get that scale and agility. And then the mobile services, I tie that in because everyone, you have multiple mobile devices, you have multiple devices that your workers and your users are supporting. We support not just Windows Phone. We do iPads, iOS, Android. It's really such an open architecture that it gives you that control. All the underlying services or agents, you pick those that you can do to build the integration models that you need. So this is a real busy slide, but I wanted to show you how advanced and sophisticated all these services can be available to you. Now, if we take it down a notch and flip to the next slide, let's put it into a simplistic way. That's everything. But when you look at Azure, it's really infrastructure, data services, and application services. We now have over 100 plus services. Each of these services, when you use them, each one are metered, and you only are being charged for the service as you use it. So if you put a virtual machine up or a dev test lab up and you're running it 9 to 5, you don't want to run those dev test labs any time off period, unless you're a global dev team. Then you can run them across the globe and 24/7. But the beauty of this is that you can take infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and make it one platform. They're not independent. They can integrate and gives you that agility and control for IaaS and the flexibility of that, but also the PaaS that gives you that simplification of no more patching and gives you that scale. So the significance of this platform is growing exponentially. And 3 years ago, customers didn't want to talk about it, or they were testing it. Now everyone is moving. They're moving off of the on-prem rack space because they have the provision standard hardware. And this way you're using the hardware that is currently provisioned in an Azure secured, highly available data center. So I'm setting the tone just so that now we can look at what are the particular workloads that we're most excited about. And Viswash is going to go through some things that he's super excited about. And it's about the announcements, narrowing down everything that's out there and what do you want to start with and where do you add extra features to your existing Azure platform. So Vishwash, I want to firstly thank you for joining us today, but also highlight to the audience here today at the cafe that Vishwash and the whole team of experts at AIS are available as follow-up, are available for any type of questions. So am I. So this is not the last time you'll hear from us. We're going to continue these sessions, but please continue to give us dialogue. We have an IM window there. If you have a pending question, put it in the IM window and we'll stop and we'll address those questions, or we'll cover them at the end of the session. All right, and can everyone please mute your phones?
You completed the task. Thank you very much.
Let's see if
figure out the problem.
Everybody will be happier.
If you're ready.
All right, anyone that's on. Okay, I got that one. All right, so I muted you, and if you're not muted, please do so. But I'm going to hand it over to Vishwash, our Azure Cafe chef, our master chef for today. And you can take it from here, Vishwash, and please open up for questions there on IM window, and we'll stop and address them. Don't be shy. Ask hard questions. Vishwash likes it that way. So thank you, Vishwash. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, first of all, John, for the very kind introduction. And I'm very excited to be here with all of you. And, I was thinking about this last night, and, Joan sent me some slides that she so eloquently covered just a few minutes back. And I was looking at all the announcements. I was at the Build a couple of months back or early April, and I was looking at the various blog posts, and you saw the slide that Jordan showed us, which talked about all the capabilities and the new features and things like that. So I was thinking to myself, how can I present this information in the context that is approachable? Of course, you can go out and look at this valuable piece of information and see what new features have been added. So what I decided to do was basically, use up the next 30 or 35 minutes that I have, and I want to leave a good 10 minutes for questions. What I wanted to do was take some of the important announcements, and you just cannot go over all of the announcements clearly. And I was joking, in fact, some of you follow me on Twitter. When I was listening to the Scott Guthrie keynote at Build, he said he only had 44 new announcements to make in the 1 hour of presentation that he had. So no way are we going to cover everything. So what I did was I broke up the announcements into workloads, because I thought that would be interesting. And many of you who are getting started with Azure may look at these workloads and say, I've been thinking about Azure for my dev test or for my performance engineering maybe, and others you may have already used it. So what I wanted to do was present the new sort of announcements and capabilities in the context of these workloads, because that's where I spend most of my time. I spend my time working with clients who are looking to Azure, maybe trying to build a POC, maybe they have a production application, and they're looking to leverage a certain capability in Azure. Or maybe they're just limited by a certain feature set, and maybe this announcement, this recent announcement, unblocks that limitation. So I'm going to talk about the new capabilities in this context. So let's start with the lift and shift, which I've been hearing a lot, and I'm sure you've seen that a lot. And the idea is not new. We all know that even though cloud has all of these benefits of elasticity and scalability, people are not just going to get rid of their on-premises data center. So in most instances, what people are doing in my conversations with CIOs and IT directors, they're saying that, well, we have this investment in our data center, whether it is hosted or self-managed. We are looking at the cloud as an extension of that. And maybe can you come in and take a look at the portfolio of applications that we have, and maybe we can move a few of these applications that are not super critical, so that we can move these applications without doing too much of refactoring or re-architecting. We'll just simply move them to the cloud because they're less important. So that will allow us to double down on the more important workloads that we have. My IT staff can focus on this because this is my core IT. And when you talk about lift and shift, there is certain aspect of infrastructure that needs to be available in the cloud for you to be able to do that, because the last thing you want to do is make code changes and things like that. So specifically in this arena, there have been some changes which I think really go a long way in making this possible. So first and foremost, and I put this, and in fact, I reorganized this slide this morning because I think it's so important. So John mentioned this. There's this concept of Azure Files. So up until now, let's say you had an ASP.NET application or a Java application, and you wanted to just simply take all of the application servers and database and move to the cloud. You could certainly do that up until now. You could just simply, take a snapshot of your virtual machines, move that to the cloud. That would work fine. But many applications require this common file share, where multiple machines or multiple processes are talking to this common file share. And up until now, we did not have that. We certainly have the blob storage, and you can certainly mount a blob as a volume in a virtual machine. But then once you've mounted that, you could not access it from other virtual machines. And so this is an important scenario, which is powered by the SMB technology, and this is SMB 2.1. That's the file share is based on. And you can think of other examples too. Maybe there's a common configuration file. Maybe you have multiple web servers. They're all looking up on a common configuration file. That was hard to do without making a change. Perhaps you have a common place to write all your diagnostic logs. Again, a change was required. So what Azure Files does in a nutshell, and you can read detailed blog post. In fact, we have references there where you can go and drill down into more details. But in a nutshell, what it allows you to do is you can basically go into Azure Storage and provision yourself an Azure file share. And then once that file share has been enabled, you can go to an Azure virtual machine and run a command that is, I'm sure, quite familiar to you. All they're doing is net use, pointing to the location of that file share and assigning it as a drive letter. And from this point on, any Windows API, file system API that you use to write to this share would work seamlessly. So that's an important change. And I know a couple of customers who were specifically looking for this, and I reached out to them and tried to explain this capability. Ultimately, though, it is powered by the Azure Blob Storage. So that's one. The other change that has happened in the last month or so is you now have the ability to lease an IP address or reserve an IP address. Now, why is this important? This is important because, as Joan mentioned, that you want to be able to shut down the resources that you're not using. So let's say I am running a test server, or I'm running a certain application which is only going to be used during the business hours. And to conserve my cost, I'm going to shut that application down in the night and then bring it back up the next morning. Because I'm shutting down the machine, I'm actually releasing the public IP that was assigned to me. So when I come back up again, a new public IP was assigned to me. And this caused some problems. Let's say you have a partner application and it is dependent on this incoming IP address. And since the IP address was liable to change, you really could not set the firewall rules unless you could set a DNS-based firewall rule, which is not always possible. So what Reserve IP allows you to do is you can reserve or lease an IP address when you shut down the machine. That's fine. You're not losing your reserved IP address. When you come back up again, reassign it. And what is interesting is that while that Reserve IP is in use, you're not being charged. Only when you're not using the Reserve IP, then you are being charged. So this is an important scenario, again, for customers who wanted to hang on to this IP address because firewall rules were dependent on it. And you can think of other scenarios too. You have some kind of a DNS server that you're propagating that your other nodes are dependent on. You obviously want to keep the IP address the same. Okay, so the other change that is quite important that has come about is, for those who are new to this, there's this concept of virtual network. And think of this as the software-defined networking implementation within the Microsoft Azure platform. So what the Windows Network, or VNet as we call it, used to do is it was really based on a scale unit. And to understand the scale unit, think of this as a cluster that existed in the Windows Azure data center. And Windows Azure or Microsoft Azure had this unique capability that you can provision 2 virtual machines and put them in an availability set, and Azure will make sure that these 2 machines will be located on 2 different racks. They will not share the power supply, they will not share the top of the rack switch and things like that. So your virtual network was really limited to that cluster. And what they have done is they've introduced this notion of a regional network, and you can see the green line here, extending out not just to that cluster, but that entire region, so the entire US to West region. In fact, I can very quickly show you, and since we have a short amount of time, I'm not going to build these demos out. What I did was I prepared a few demos to motivate that topic, and you can get in touch with me if you wanted more details. So here is an example of a network configuration file. Now I should tell you that these features were released in the last few weeks. Some of these features don't have a UI available for them. So if you went into a portal and if you wanted to create a regional network, you can't do that. But what you can do instead is, download an existing virtual network configuration file, which would look something like this, and then you can modify this file. So in this case, the only interesting thing that I want to call out here is, rather than limiting myself to a cluster, I was able to specify a region. So I'm saying that my regional network is all across the West US Azure data center. Okay. Once I have this, I can simply go in, save this file, and let me go into the portal here. And let me just go down. I'm inside the portal. And if I go into the network, and all I did was basically I created a new network and I said import that XML file. You can see this here. And all I did was imported this file, and that resulted in this virtual network. And as you can see here, all the machines here, if I go into this, all the machines are based in that region. Okay? So this regional network actually allows you a number of different capabilities that's worth talking about here. One of them I already talked about, which is the reserved IP address, but it also enables you certain other interesting capabilities. What if you wanted to enable an internal load balancer? So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have a 3-tier application and your web tier is trying to call into a collection of nodes that make up your application tier. So today in your on-premises environment, you may be having some kind of a load balancer that routes traffic in some algorithm-based manner to one of those application nodes. Well, you can do that now in Azure. This was not possible before this announcement. So the regional network, which is the new virtual network, if you will, allows you leased IP addresses. It allows you internal load balancer. It even allows you this ability to connect to VNets. And this is something that people have been asking for. Let's say I have one virtual network and another virtual network in the cloud. To be able to traverse between these 2 virtual networks, before these announcements, you had to go out to the load balancer and come back in again, which costed you additional latency. But now you can connect the 2 virtual networks as well. So a number of improvements. Again, think of this in the context of lift and shift. These are networking constructs that your existing applications may need, and these enhancements allow you to move these workloads to Azure. So let's go back to the slides here. So I talked about the leased IP address. We talked about the regional network. Keep going forward. The other workload, and we are seeing a great uptick in our customers, because whether you are willing to move your production workload to the cloud or not, and you may have a compliance reasons and certain security reasons which may be giving you pause about moving your workload to the cloud. Although I have to say that in the recent months, Azure has acquired compliance for PCI, which is the payment account industry, the HIPAA compliance, including the FedRAMP compliance, which is a standard that is required by many of the government agencies. So on the compliance front, Azure platform has grown. So I certainly encourage you to visit again and look at what compliance is available. But despite that, if you still are not comfortable moving a production workload to the cloud, what we are seeing is many CIOs and IT directors are saying, well, let's just move our dev and test environment to the cloud because there's no classified information there. And certainly, dev and test has been around, and people have been doing dev and test on Azure for several months, not just because of the announcements in the last couple of months. The couple of things that I wanted to talk about, though, which go a long way in making the dev test more proficient or more productive now, is something called the automation service, and I'll show this to you in a minute. So we all know, and if you've worked on any public cloud platform or worked on Azure, we know that repeatability is very important. So, and to gain advantage of repeatability, you need to automate as many operations as you can, because you don't want to sit there and download the software and install the software and bring up your machines. You want to be able to automate it because you don't want to, you want to do things quickly. If something goes wrong, you want to be able to take your virtual machines, move it to another data center, or if they're already there, just spin them up quickly. All of that requires automation. So that area of automating using the API provided by the Azure platform is commonly referred to as the DevOps. And we certainly at IaaS have been investing a lot on DevOps, and many of our customers are doing that as well. And frankly, we have taken many of our developers, because this DevOps, this asset that you're building for automation, has to be treated as code. You have to source control it, you have to version control it, you have to test it, you have to do all of those things. So frankly, we have taken many of our developers, or capable developers, and then introduced them to Azure Management API and allowed them to build these DevOps capability. Now, one challenge that you would run into with DevOps is, today, before this announcement, you had to run that automation piece from some machine, whether that machine was on your data center, or maybe you provisioned a machine in Azure and then ran your automation scripts there. And the challenge there was that you need to keep this running for a long time, because the automation typically runs for hours. You're provisioning a SharePoint environment with multiple databases and things like that. So the automation can take a while. And the other challenge was that these automation libraries tend to change quite a bit. In fact, Microsoft just released the newest version of PowerShell SDK 2.3 in the last couple of weeks. So if you have this environment where you're executing these automation tests, you need to keep this abreast and updated at all times. So what the Windows Azure team has done is added a new service right within the portal called Automation Service, where you can simply author your automation scripts. And in fact, they give you a browser-based editor to do that. Once you've authored the automation scripts, you can then move them or publish them to production and then simply run it. And let me just show you a very quick example of that. And I'm going to go back into my portal here, and let me just find the automation tab. This is the tab I was talking about. Right here is the new automation tab. And if I click on the automation tab, I have a bunch of automation things. Let me just dive into this, something called the run books, which is their way of basically think of run book as a PowerShell script, which can be executed, a self-standing unit of PowerShell script, which can then be executed. Let me just show you. In fact, I just ran it. You can see the time here. Just an hour earlier, I just ran this run script. So let me just go ahead and show you what this looks like. Let's go into the author tab. And this is the code that I want to show you. We don't get into the semantics of the code too much, but you get the idea here. I get a full-fledged design IntelliSense experience. I can write my scripts here. Now, somebody who wants to, and all the script is doing is provisioning a VM right here called the runbook VM. Okay, and somebody who is not well versed with this automation and things like that can simply come into the portal, look at one of the books, and just execute the book, or even schedule an execution of the book. In fact, as I showed you earlier, I ran this an hour earlier. I didn't want to spend time just waiting for this script to complete. and it ran at 1038, and all it did was create a virtual machine. In fact, if I go back here, let me go into the virtual machines tab here, and you can just see right here, I have this machine running right here. Okay, so all I did there. Now going back to the slide very quickly, so this is the automation service. In addition to the automation service, something that's very important for DevOps is once you have spun up these machines could have multiple disks, multiple configuration settings, multiple firewall rules. And imagine if you're a developer and you have set up this configuration and you reproduced a problem, and you want to be able to take that collection of information and hand it to a colleague of yours who can then spin up this environment in their MSDN subscription. Because, you know, if you are an MSDN developer, or if you have access to one of the MSDN subscriptions, you get a certain number of hours for free, and depending on the type of MSDN subscription you have. So what they have enabled now is from the portal, and you can do this through script as well, you can simply go in and capture that configuration that is executing. So if in our case, if I went back here, and you can see here right now, let me zoom into this. You can see that I have the capture tab right here. I just spun up a machine, I can hit capture. This will create a snapshot of my configuration, essentially a set of images, which I can then share with my colleague, who can then spin them up in their environment, connect it through Visual Studio, and start debugging. So an important change there. And by the way, we won't have time to get into Visual Studio just yet, but it's probably worth mentioning here that from Visual Studio now, Visual Studio 2013, you can now go into the Server Explorer and look at all the virtual machines. And not only that, you can say, hey, from Visual Studio, I want to debug my application. So go attach to that instance in Azure and allow me to step through the code. So that's all part of the dev test experience that has changed here. So I talked about capture. Another important change that I want to talk about, the VM agent. So some of you are probably familiar with this if you've worked with cloud services, the web role and worker role concept. There we had an agent. Now Microsoft is making that VM agent, which is a lightweight agent, available for infrastructure as a service virtual machines as well. So how does that help? This slide is hard to see, but I can call out a couple of interesting things that are happening here. Number one, once you choose to install this generic low footprint VM agent, it enables you to manage third-party optional extensions by virtue of this. So what kind of agents would that be? Well, if you don't want to write PowerShell script, I showed you one in the previous discussion. If you want to use things like Chef and Puppet, which are doing well in the DevOps space, well, you can install that extension. And then recently Microsoft said, if you are provisioning a virtual machine and you want to put anti-malware extension on it, well, you can do that. All you have to do is select those, and this VM agent will then manage those extensions for you. So once again, a good story in the dev and test scenario. Okay, moving on. My favorite feature, and probably not getting enough coverage from my perspective, but I think it's very important to understand, perhaps because it is a limited availability just yet, but I think it is important as an Azure developer and Azure user to understand this concept. So to motivate this concept, let me take you back to the portal, and this will become very clear. Now, if you look at the portal, and I'm sure you've seen this, here it shows you all of the services that are running, which is a great way of sort of absorbing this information. But the problem with this is that all my applications, whether it is my CRM application, whether it is my MVC application, whether it is my dev test, all of the machines tend to show up in this one screen. I don't have a way to sort of logically organize it. That's one sort of problem with this. And for someone like me, I have like 12 or 13 subscriptions. Each subscription has multiple applications running. So I need a way to group my resources in a way. That's one. I also want to be able to, look at the pricing information associated with my logical collection. So I have an MVC application, and that includes a few machines. I should be able to get the billing information associated with that resource group. And then finally, I should be able to treat these resources as a unit These resources within this resource group should be able to see each other. They have some connection in terms of the life cycle that they have. So as you can see clearly, while this old portal gives you all of this information, the information is really organized in terms of services, not in terms of resources. And that's where this concept of a resource group comes into the picture. And one other important change with this resource group is, up until now, when I showed you this run book, it was essentially a PowerShell script which went ahead and sort of programmatically provisioned a virtual machine. What if I wanted to provision these resources declaratively? What if all I wanted to do was just define in an XML file of some sort that I want this machine, and by the way, once you have done provisioning the SQL box, give me an application tier box, and by the way, when you're done provisioning the application tier box, provision me some storage. What if I wanted to do this in a nested manner and let Azure take care of that? And turns out that resource groups are designed just for these things. So they are designed for, let me bring this next slide, they're designed exactly for these three things. They're designed to be a unit of management so that you can deploy, update, and delete these units or resources that make up this unit together. It gives you an identity. It gives you an ability to group them for metering, for quota purposes, and for roll-up information, etc. We have a customer today, and they wanted to get the billing information by the various departments they have. And because of the limitation that I talked about previously, they had to rely on some kind of a naming convention associated with their resources to figure out which group is using what resources. Well, resource group solves that problem. So let me very quickly go into a PowerShell editor here, and I can show you what this resource group looks like. And you can see this here. Turns out that that declarative format is JSON format, which is increasingly the format of choice for these kinds of things. So what I did here was I've created a resource group, and without getting into the details of this, you can understand that this is a parameter section. I can pass in a bunch of parameters. What will I call my website? What database would I call it? And what kinds of SKUs I want. Once I've defined that, I can define my resources. And here I'm saying I want an Azure website here I want an Azure website, and I passed in the name of a parameter. Please create this website for me. Here is the connection string, and so on and so forth. I define this. And then, by the way, getting a declarative way to do this does not mean we lose out on the programmatic way. You get full fidelity whether you do programmatically or you do declaratively. Okay. I can simply come in and execute this JSON file, and here's my PowerShell script to do that. And here is a simple PowerShell script. I take a bunch of parameters, and let me just zoom into this. I take a bunch of parameters. I say, please create this in this subscription. And Arun is a coworker of mine. Use the storage account. And oh, by the way, the website that you create, all of the code for that website is located in this zip container. Okay, and go ahead and provision this, and it will go read the JSON. It will figure out the dependencies in the resources. And in fact, it's smart enough that if it finds that there are dependencies, then it will do sequentially. But if it finds that resources can be parallelized, it can certainly expedite your provisioning by parallelizing those operations. So very, very important feature. In fact, resource group is what is powering the new Azure portal. And let me just show you what that new portal looks like. So you've seen the old portal. In fact, we were right there in a moment ago. Let me just quickly show you what the new portal looks like. And I'm sure you're going to just, everybody who sees it for the first time, they're amazed by how flexible this is. So this is the new portal. Not all services are available here yet. So you will have to go to the old portal for many of the services which are not here clearly. But this portal is allows you to think of your Azure resources in the context of resource groups. So first and foremost, it is showing me the health of my machines, and it is showing me that all the data centers that Joan talked about looks like they're all green now. I can go in and say, show me all the resource groups, and here are all my resource groups. Let me just click on the resource group here, and it is showing me that within that resource group, I have things like a database, I have a SQL Server instance, I have an Azure website, and so on and so forth. And I can also very quickly look at the billing information associated with my resource group. So, and I also have lots of flexibility in terms of drilling down into this information. So I can say, hey, I need more information about the SQL Server group, and I can drill down into this. Or, let me just go back here. I pinned it to my start menu. So this entire portal is quite customizable, as you can see here. And I can obviously go back to my old portal. So if I go back to that resource group here, and these are all the properties of this group. As you can see, it is a drill down kind of a capability. I can keep drilling into this piece of information, and I can then collapse things that I don't need. Okay, so that's the new portal. Once again, to understand the new portal, you need to understand the resource model, and hopefully that previous explanation was helpful there. Okay, so we already talked about the resource group. Today you can have Azure websites and Azure databases in there, and more things to come, I'm sure. Okay, so how are we doing in terms of time? Okay, so now that concludes the dev test and lift and shift portions. Let me very quickly talk about the performance. So what do I mean here? And you've probably heard of the term Visual Studio Online. I want to show you a very quick example of that. But before I do that, let me bring up the screenshot here. And this is a screenshot of a highly customized Visual Studio Online portal. And think of this in a logical progression. So you have built out a dev test environment, and you have deployed, let's say, the latest build of your system that you are building, and you now want to analyze the performance. Say if you've not gone into production, hopefully, and you want to run these load tests. What Visual Studio Online allows you to do is, now that you've deployed this, and your application does not need to be in Azure. It can be in any data center as long as you have a publicly addressable endpoint. Load testing service can reach you. But in this example that I'm going to show you, my application resides in Azure IaaS. I'm running an infrastructure. I'm running infrastructure as a service, a SharePoint instance that is. And then I'm using the load testing service to subject this application to a load test. And then in addition to running the load test, I'm using the application insights capability to figure out the health of my application as the load test is running. So as you can see, this is a progression of the dev test. And this is a very good example of this dashboard being customized. But let me actually take you to my own live dashboard. And this is ais.visualstudio.com. And once again, here, I have a number of applications that I'm monitoring. And let me just pick one application that someone at IaaS has been running load test with. And here you can see this is the load test data. In addition to the load test data, I can also go into the diagnostics tab here. And once I go into the diagnostics tab here, it is going to start showing me. This will take a second to refresh here. Maybe I should just, it is showing me data based on, this window right here. So the last 24 hours. And right now it is showing me the performance information that was collected by the App Insight and sent to this portal. So I can see this here. Not only can I not see this performance information, if I drill down here, right now I don't see any performance events. But if there were any slowness in my application, that would show up right here. And I would be able to click on these performance events. And these are customizable events. And I can say anything that is causing a latency of more than 100 milliseconds, just as an example, please show it up as a performance event so I can track it. So once again, beyond dev test, I can run a load test. I can monitor the health of my application. And I can, get information about how my application is going to behave in load before it is going into production. And if I need to make some changes, I can do that hopefully ahead of time. So that's the performance engineering part of it. So we've talked about dev tests, we've talked about performance. Let's talk about the next workload, which is the cloud first. So up until now, we talked about lift and shift, dev test, and performance. But there are a number of workloads which are, you are trying to build this a marketing campaign, perhaps you're trying to do big data analysis, you're trying to write a mobile application that is going to scale out to a large number of users. All those workloads are commonly termed as the cloud first workloads because it makes all the sense. These are slam dunk use cases for the cloud. And clearly the Azure platform has provided you these abilities. And sorry for the noise in the background here. Clearly the Azure platform has given you a number of capabilities for the cloud first capability, but there have been some enhancements that I want to talk about here. The first enhancement that I want to talk about is related to the Azure SQL database. And this has been a common ask for teams that have used the Azure SQL database. You are providing me, without having to set up clustering or mirroring, you are providing me this high robustness. But what if I want to roll back to a certain instance of a database? What if I want to roll back? What if I made an error and I deleted a bunch of data? What if I wanted to roll back to the 24th day from the day of production, or n-24th or 23rd day? Well, there is the self-service restore capability that was announced just at Build. And this is part of the Azure Premium, as you can see at the bottom here. This is part of an Azure Premium capability. The other capability that has often been requested is, it's great that you give me high tolerance within a data center, but what if I want to replicate my Azure databases to another data center? And this was another capability announced and built, and again, part of the Premium Edition. You can take an Azure database and set up a geo-replication, can have up to 4 readable secondaries in another data center, which is 400 or miles or more away. So you can certainly do that. My favorite is the traffic manager. So you're building a high-scale application, and you're trying to deploy it across several Azure data centers, let's say within the US. And what you want to be able to do is load balance across these instances that you have across the various Azure data centers. So Traffic Manager, in fact, went generally available in the last few weeks. In fact, there was an interesting addition to the Traffic Manager that not only can you not load balance Azure-based endpoints, you can also load balance your own web endpoints that may be hosted within your data center as well. So what I did here, and I can very quickly show you this. You can see Azure Cafe written here. What I did was, just before the session started, in fact, just a few minutes before Joan kicked off the session, I ran a script and I said, I wanted to deploy this Azure Cafe website across the Virginia data center. And then also I wanted to deploy it to the San Antonio data center. And you can see here, in about 15-20 minutes, these applications got deployed right here in the East Coast and West Coast. But then what I also wanted to do was load balance this so that people coming from West Coast go to the West Coast directly, people coming from East Coast go to the East Coast location directly. So what I also did, all this programmatically, was went into Traffic Manager right here. And you can see inside the Traffic Manager, I just created this Azure Cafe profile, which is now online. So I can now go to Azure Cafe profile.trafficmanager.net. In fact, you can do that right now. And depending on the location or where you are attending this webinar today, you'll automatically be redirected to a location that is closest to you. So that's an important capability, once again, to note here. So I want to, it's about 12:52, and let me just check with Joan if she wants me to cover this additional topic or yield this time for question and answers. So Joan, let me pause here for a second, please.
Yep. Let's see if anyone has any questions. And if you do, please list them into the window. I know we covered a lot, but you can ask anything, even outside of the topics we talked about. Or, since we have a small group, you can even open your audio and ask a question directly. That's fine too.
Yep, just unmute yourself and ask a question. And I forgot to give you, if you don't have a question immediately, the value of a conversation like this is only if there's a two-way communication. So if you don't have a question right now, because so much is being thrown at you, I certainly understand. I will give you my Twitter handle, and you can certainly get hold of that. Get hold of me anytime. Send me a question if you like. And I may be delayed, but I'll definitely get back to you if you have a question there. Okay, so if June, then that gives me the last 3-4 minutes to cover the last item that I have, if that's all right
That's
with you, John.
perfect. Yep, that's perfect. And I'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the deck and the recording so that you can share it with your team or follow up with Vishwash on specific questions.
Thank you, John. So one thing before I move on to my last workload, and I added this slide, and this question has come up on a project that we were executing just last week, so I thought it was important that others may be interested in this. So we have a customer who really likes Azure websites because of all the things that I talked about. You can scale them very quickly. You can now associate them with Traffic Manager. You can deploy changes very quickly. But the blocking thing for them was that they wanted to talk to an on-premises Active Directory instance. And everything else seemed fine, but they just wanted this. And we talked to them and said, can you use the Windows Azure AD? And they said, well, we can at some point in the future, but right now we want you to connect that Azure website-based implementation to an on-premises AD instance. And that was indeed a blocker for us until this announcement came out at Tech Aid last week, where Azure websites now allow you a hybrid connectivity. And getting into the details of this, you can pick up on a few terms and look for a blog post here, but I'll give you how this comes about. This is not a lower level connection that is happening. This is an application level connectivity. So basically what they do is they allow you to route that AD-based connection traffic over to your data center through this BizTalk hybrid connection capability. And now, not only do you have full advantage of the Azure websites, but you can also go to a hybrid environment, go to your AD, maybe go to a SQL Server, database, what have you. So keep this in mind, an important change if you're looking at Azure websites. The last thing that I want to talk about, and it's 12:55, and I'll probably cover this in the next 2 or 3 minutes, is the disaster recovery scenario. And I've had customers who said that, well, we are happy with our data center, and we are, right now we have enough capacity in our data center, and we will certainly look at the cloud when we reach this capacity. But one thing that we are interested in immediately is the disaster recovery scenario. Because frankly, setting up a co-location capability is expensive. And even when we have set it up, we are not sure it will work as designed, because just testing that thing is very difficult, if not cost prohibitive, just to set that up. And all the infrastructure and resources that you have to align to test your DR setup can be non-trivial. So these customers have talked to us, and what we have been recommending to them is, well, they can run something like a data protection manager. So they have all their workloads in their on-premises environment or with a hoster, and they can run a data protection manager, which means they are, in an asynchronous manner, taking their virtual machines, taking their data, and then sending that data to a very efficient, cost-efficient, and performance-efficient, I should add, storage in the form of Azure Blob Storage. So they are, incrementally sending these changes over to the Azure Blob Storage. And now, with some delay, and that delay is acceptable to them within their framework of recovery time objectives or recovery point objectives, these machines and data is being shipped to an Azure data center. And then in case of an outage, they can simply go to that data center, run some kind of an automation script, and bring these machines up, and continue to host their environment and their applications in Azure for the duration of the outage. And then once the outage has been corrected, they want to ship the changes back, or at least bring up their primary environment backup and start using that. So that is becoming an important workload for many customers here as well. So what I wanted to talk about, and this is my last slide here, what I wanted to talk about here was, sorry, I didn't want to zoom into this. All I was looking for was my pen. And so what I described to you was sending this data to a data center into a blob storage. And depending on how you've configured your blob storage, your data is then replicated to another region within the Azure data center. And when you, as soon as you define a primary data center, a secondary data center can be defined for you. So you can certainly do that. And what is interesting about this is that the Azure team is also asynchronously shipping your data to a second data center. And the data in that data center is now available in a read-only manner to you. This is a huge change, because previously what was happening was, even though they were shipping this data to an alternate data center, that secondary copy of your data was not available to you until the time Microsoft declared that to be a contingency and rerouted the traffic to the secondary data center. But now you have an application level access to that secondary data in a read-only manner. And it is quite interesting because if you have created shared access URL to your primary data center, turns out that those shared access signatures will work in the read-only secondary as well. And then the final point I want to make is related to the import-export service, which is huge. What you can do here is, let's say you wanted to ship huge amounts of data into the Windows Azure data center, and sometimes even though there's no charge to move data into an Azure data center, if you're trying to move terabytes of data, it becomes really a difficult exercise to move this data. But now you can put this data on a 4 terabyte disk, BitLocker protect it, so you can encrypt your data and ship it to Microsoft, and the Microsoft teams will then load this data into your data center for you, and you can bring and use that data as you see fit. And of course, it works the other way around as well. At some point, you want to have access to your data, you can say, please export this, and they will put your data on a disk and then ship it back to you, which you can then bring that up within your own data center or a host or facility. So that's 1 o'clock, John. That's exactly on time. So do you have a, should I bring up the last slide?
There's another slide that you bring up, and it's the last one. There's a ton of information out there, but what we tried to do is shrink it down to some of the things like what's new in Azure, the storage and dev test. What we covered today, we didn't go deep into ExpressRoute, but that is definitely an area that a lot of customers are moving towards on the virtual private network. So that's something, and then the blog areas that are continually being updated. And I know, Vishwash, you have a blog, you're Twitter all the time, a lot of white papers that you've written, books and everything. So, Vishwash is a local expert for you that can, help bring this to reality in your particular workloads. Because what we gave today, Vishwash did a fantastic job covering a lot of the workloads, but every workload and every business and technical requirement is somewhat different, and how you apply AAD or resource management may differ depending on your organization and your needs. So we're here to help you. We are here to get your feedback. You have my email address. You have Vishwash's email address. Please reach out to us. Give us feedback on what you want to know further and deeper dives into this session. If you have any kind of requests for future sessions, we'd like to hear that too. Did we hit the mark, or are we off track? Did this not bring any value? It's just a very compelling platform that it's hard for all of us to keep up with. And if you use this as your subject matter experts, you will advance your potential on extending your data center with these services. And Vishwash and I are here to continue the dialogue in any capacity that you wish. And Vishwash, I want to thank you again, as I don't know how you sleep at night, because you're always on top of the latest and greatest and complex workloads. So thank you for being our chef today.
Thank you, John.
And thank you all. And Vishwas, is there anything else that you wanted to say before everyone breaks?
No, Joan, you summed it up very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. And thank you all for joining. And again, give us your feedback. Reach out to me at Vishwas, and we're happy to help you in any way. Thanks for joining the cafe today, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thanks.